Unspoken Issues.
Welcome to another episode of the Unspoken Issues podcast. And it's going to be a quick one tonight, I think. We'll see. I know that I wrote an awful lot, so let's not make that the longest part of this podcast. By the way, I'm Jesse Starcher. Over there is Dean Compton. Dean Compton, by golly, are you ready to talk some cable, blood, and metal tonight?
Well, I can't really remember many times in my life when I wasn't ready to discuss Cable, leader of X-Force, one of the coolest characters of all time. Just everything he's ever done is cool. Everything he's ever going to do is cool. Got a cyborg guy? You know I'm in. I'm easy to please. He's got giant guns. He's got a cyborg guy. He has a metal arm, and he says cool stuff like, don't forget to have some fun, too, as he's, blasting people. I'm in.
And Darry waits down there. He is ready to talk some cable, blood, and metal. I'm assuming. Are you ready, sir?
Yeah, super excited. Bought these off the rack when they came out. Loved reading them now. Yeah, they were a good time.
Well, Cable, Blood, and Metal, like we had mentioned, cover date's October of 92 for issue number 1. This was written by Fabian Nicieza, John Romita Jr. on pencils, if you couldn't tell by them covers. I mean, that is definitely John Romita Jr. Dan Green on inks, Bill Oakley lettering, and Brad Venkata, the colorist here. So I thought what we would do real quick before we get into this, because we do have... Really, there's only maybe 3 or 4 main characters, but when you look at what's going on surrounding Cable, we're going to talk about the members of the Wild Pack / Six Pack here, as well as Stryfe and the Mutant Liberation Front. Not all those members. We're just going to keep it to the general, hey, that's a group, watch out. First off, the Wild Pack / Six Pack, which their name was changed. Originally, it was the Wild Pack. We get introduced in this story to these guys as the Wild Pack. They're essentially a mercenary group. They changed their name because Silver Sable apparently was running around with the pack of people called the Wild Pack. So they were like, okay.
Her country's #1 business.
Right. Right.
How could they not have heard of the Wild Pack? Honestly, how does that happen? Oh yeah, them.
Right.
It would be like if you started a store and called it Walmart. Oh yeah, Walmart. I didn't think about that.
Whoops. My mistake. Didn't realize that was taken. I will, from here on out, refer to them as the Six Pack. Now, they're led by Cable at this point. Now, we start this book. There's a lot of time jumps, so when I get into the synopsis of the story, we're going to do it linearly, and I think that's a word. I'm going to go from the past, and then we're going to work our way to the present. So as there's a lot of time jumps, basically, that serve as a mechanic in the book to kind of make you, basically keep you on the hook for what's happening. Causes some good reveals. But regardless, that's not the way we're going to be telling the story tonight. Before we get into that, though, I want to talk about the members of the Six Pack. And Dean, you're here to help me out. Darry, you hop in as well. Mm-hmm. Cable, I guess, really to understand what's going on in this book, he's come back in time. He's a time-traveling mutant. Now, this is straight from MarvelFandom.com as well. He forms this mercenary group, and he is trying to understand the current era's threats and obtain finances. So the best thing he's thinking is all right, I'd make a mercenary group. I'm going to make some money. Plus I'll have a lay of the land and understand who these, maybe who my opposition will be. So Cable's come back from the future into the past. But one of the questions... I wondered
about that. I'm glad that they stated that because, as I was... And I wondered about this back in the day when I first got it. I was like, if he came back in time to, stop Apocalypse and Stryfe and stuff, why are you slumming with these guys? What's the point? why don't you go shoot Stryfe or something? But that makes sense if he needed some money,
Yeah.
Sure.
Yep, absolutely.
I get paid to smart off.
Oh, yeah.
You do what you're good at.
So Cable, created by Louise Simonson and Rob Liefeld, first appeared New Mutants number 87 from January of 1990.
I'm just I'm just a huge Cable fan. One of the biggest there is. I loved him from the time. The first time I saw Cable was the 1991 Marvel Universe card set. He has this gun that looks kind of like a vacuum cleaner. And but you can tell it's actually a techno laser, and I'm into techno lasers. And then on the back, there's only 4 sentences about it. It was the mysterious leader of X-Force. Yeah, this is a big deal. I also, if they have done one, I'm unaware of it. But why hasn't there been a Cable Punisher team up? They met in a Marvel UK, and Punisher, Cable was helping Punisher out of someplace. They both converged on the same spot for different reasons, called him by allies. And he's got him on his shoulders. He's like, what's the leader of X-Force doing here? And I'm like, that does not sound like something the Punisher would say. Cable, what's the leader of X-Force doing here? It's it was, Anyway, I'd like to. It was a little silly, but I'd like to see a genuine team up between them. Like, why not put War Machine in it too and shoot them all?
Yeah, one of the things I guess I should probably say is, as a mutant, Cable's pretty powerful. The thing that's kind of limiting his power, though, is he was infected, I guess is the right word, with the techno-organic virus, which has changed his arm, to a metal alloy in some way. And he's always got to keep this virus in check, and that kind of limits his power. But other than that, he's obviously good with a gun. So, but Darry, anything else you'd like to add about Cable there?
If you ask 6 different people who are roughly our age what they think the defining attribute of Cable is, I feel like you'll get 6 completely different answers. Like, he's a time traveler, he's a soldier of fortune, he's Phoenix and Cyclops' kid, even though that's not technically true, and he's all these other things. And from a certain point of view, they're all true. But this miniseries, just because it's so early in the character's history, has almost none of that, and it's this like straight up 80s action film that is drawn by John Romita Jr. And I love that about it, because you don't have to know all the lore. You don't have to know all the nonsense. You just have to know a handful of characters who are relatively new at the time, and you just kind of enjoy the ride. So again, I love this. I wish there were more Cable stories just like this.
Yeah.
The thing you said is like you could get 6 different answers from somebody about what Cable is. But the one thing that they'll always have in common is Cable carries a gun, and he always has a gun that's so the only person who could miss with this gun would be this person who could afford to buy it. Like they're always like
they
like,
are
oh,
massive.
I there was a squirrel over there. I better shoot it with a gun the size of Jupiter. And I respect it, honestly. Listen, when it comes to brute force, if it doesn't work, you're just not using it up. And Cable understands that.
You're not wrong. I actually wrote an article for the site years and years ago where I covered the Joe Casey run where Cable uses a spear, the scimitar, spelled with the PSI, if I'm correct.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Which was like the one time in his history where they were like, we're going to get rid of the guns. We're going to try to do something a little bit more creative. And the reason I covered it was because the R was by Jose Ladron, who was basically doing a Kirby impression. And I thought that was amazing. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Aside from that very limited period of time, I feel like the one defining characteristic is Cable's the X-Man who uses guns. That's his thing.
Right. Which is why, just 18 seconds after he shows up, they bring in Bishop. And no offense, but I'm like, did we need Bishop? Aren't these the same guy, like a mutant from the future with big guns who, I gotta stop everything from happening? Did we need that? I don't know. And again, I haven't really kept up with the X-Books since 97 or 98. So maybe they've been able to diverge that since. But for me, I'm just like, we don't need both. And Cable was first, and Cable is cooler.
It's funny because it's almost like a Superman Shazam thing where Cable was so stupid popular that you could almost see a bunch of writers and editors sitting around a table going, can we do this? Can we do this again? Can we can we have another one of these? And someone in the back is like, well, what if he's a cop? What if he's a different ethnicity? And what if instead of having a robot eye, he's got a tattoo over his eye? And everyone else there is like, oh yeah, we're done. That's lunch. Someone get someone to draw that. We're done. But you're right, because I remember even in the cartoon, they would both show up and they had very similar backstories. And I was like, wait, why is there so much time travel in this weird racial allegory cartoon? But I like them both. And to your point, the most recent arcs for both of the characters, or I don't know, this might have been 10 years ago at this point, they had them fight each other. I need to prevent your future so my future gets saved, and the other one was like, nah, I gotta kill you to prevent your future so my future gets saved. It was the worst Doctor Who fan fiction I've ever read. But I do like Bishop. I always go back to the fact that he was the only X-Man on Iron Man's side in the superhero Civil War, which always tickles me, and it's just that's how diverse the X-Men are.
Yeah, they're so diverse. They have a cop. Great.
They have the one cop. Technically, I guess he was part of a whole future ex-cop force, but I don't know that we ever saw the other ones. So
Shard shows up at some point.
Oh, Shard! Oh my God! Yes, I forgot about her.
I like Shard better than I like Bishop. So
XSE, was that what XSE?
XSE, yeah. Xavier's security enforcers. Yeah, you want to talk about the height of '90s culture.
All right, next on the list, we got Domino. I think she was pretty popular at the time, but she's definitely not the focus of this book. My best description here is a deadly trained mutant soldier with the power of probability manipulation. I'm taking that straight from MarvelFandom.com there. Created by Rob Liefeld, first appearance, X-Force number 8. As a matter of fact, a lot of this six-pack, their first appearance is X-Force number 8 from January of 1992.
I think this is the real Domino. Around this time, it was like revealed that the Domino who had been hanging out with X-Force was actually Vanessa, who was like Tolliver's girlfriend, and she winds up Copycat, I think winds up being her code name. I think this comes out around the same time, within like 4 or 5 months of that. Domino's cool. She looks cool. She's arguably the coolest character like in these two books. Like everything she does is cool. Everything she says is cool. She's got a cool staff weapon. Her costume looks really good. Like honestly, like out of everybody here, like her seems ergonomical, and like maybe not ergonomical because how could you do those jump kicks? But at the same time, it's armored, so somebody shoots her. Like I like that that aspect of it. But I've always liked Domino, just for appearance sake alone. In these two comics, I don't think her probability powers come up at all.
Oh.
But that is something that I enjoyed seeing develop later. I'm always a big fan of people who can do that, like Black Cat, Scarlet Witch to an extent. It's always neat to have creators get these characters to utilize those powers without them becoming too much of a Deus Ex Machina. And like I said, it doesn't come up in these two issues. It's mostly just her being like, "God damn, why are we doing anything we're not getting paid for?" I respect it.
I'm not a huge fan of Rob Liefeld, the person, but I am overly fascinated by Rob Liefeld, the creator, because you can look at these early days with X-Force and Deadpool and Cable and all the things that spun out of his brief time on the New Mutants book, and you can just see new characters, even if many times they're, I won't say knockoffs, but they're obviously inspired by other things that were popular at the time. Right. I don't really have a problem with that because, like I keep bringing up on these things, I think Captain Marvel's a better character than Superman. So if you're going to if you're going to steal from what's popular, I really don't think there's anything wrong with that as long as you're doing something unique. And I'm fascinated by Liefeld at this period of time because, like, this book is filled with 6 new characters, and then all the villains are new and everything else. And it's like, they're not the most well-developed characters. Most of them don't survive the next couple of years, but I always like to support when I see someone actually doing something new, because I think, so many times it's like, oh, hey, I'm going to be the new Spider-Man writer, and immediately I'm going to give you all the takes on the classic Ditko characters. And it's like, that's great, but could you please add to that pantheon? That would be really nice.
Yeah, right.
Hey,
right.
I got a big shocker for you guys. There's a new Green Goblin. It's going to be a mystery who it is.
Yeah,
You're never going to know. Oh, my God. It all points to Mary Jane Watson Parker, but it's not her. It was Norman Osborn all along. My God.
Dan Slott was on Spider-Man for 10 years, and he had some great, great stories. And I always go back to the fact that his very last story was, what if Norman Osborn got the Carnage symbiote? And I just want to be like, what are you, me in middle school? Like, you're one of the highest rated writers writing arguably the #1 character. You can't come up with something better than that. So I always looked at
when the Silver Surfer got all carnaged up. We liked that.
Oh, I'm not even saying it's a bad story. I'm just saying if that's your ending, if that's how you're going to end 10 years. No. You want to throw the Carnage symbiote on Norman Osborn, that sounds great. I just always thought it was funny where it was like, I've been on the book so long. I'm arguably the definitive writer of the modern time. It's like, what's going to be my big exit strategy? It's like, I'm going to take these 2 toys and mash them together for like a 2-issue arc where he takes over Silver Surfer. That's fine. But just to be like, I don't know, the last word out the door just seemed like, I don't know. You couldn't think of something new. I want that newness, and Liefeld delivers it with these characters. Even if they're not the most original and they don't hang around, he's trying. I have to give him credit for that, even if he's got many flaws stacked against him.
I think Liefeld's word for that is echoes.
When it comes to these characters, and Jesse, you'll relate to this. I don't mean this to sound bad, because I think Rob is 100 times more talented than this guy, but it's a lot like Vince Russo. Rob has a lot from wrestling, a WWE and WCW and Impact Wrestling writer who has a lot of flaws, but one of the flaws he doesn't have is coming up with ideas. He will come up with a million idea after idea, and he has ideas for guys that you don't normally have ideas for. If you recall, No, some of it doesn't get fleshed out, but when you read like Rob's X-Force or his Avengers or even some Youngblood stuff, guys you only see for like 3 or 4 panels, he's dropping hints and stuff about him. Some of it doesn't ever pay off, but like he has ideas for even the people who aren't the main players. I think it reminds me of Vince Russo some. Again, I don't want to sound sacrilegious. Rob Liefeld at least 100 times more creative than Vince Russo, but you kind of see what I'm talking about, Jesse, as a wrestling fan.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There's the obvious thing, too, of who he's clearly inspired by. And again, I hate making the comparison, but this is a Kirby thing, right? Like,
agree. 100%.
Yeah, like Kirby hated reusing the same characters. It was like, if I'm going to be drawing this thing, especially at the speed of light, I want to come up with something new. That's the fun part. That's what I enjoy. So there's a lot of like Kirby energy in this early stuff. And Liefeld didn't draw the issues that we're talking about today, but I mean, his DNA is intrinsic to this thing. And it's just like, there's this idea of like, I'm going to keep throwing new concepts and new characters, things I'm pulling out of the ether at you. And if you like certain ones, they're going to stick around. If they really touch me, I'm going to stick around. Deadpool, clearly still incredibly popular today, but other ones fall by the wayside. But that's not a bad thing. I mean, you know, most of the characters that were created in the 60s, a lot of them were really good, but there are definitely ones we haven't seen since then. That's okay too, because
Turner D Century.
Exactly. The Melter, right? The Melter's not showing up in Avengers 4.
Turner D Century would be interesting now, though, because like we just go back to 2000, right? Like he wants everybody to like go to raves and stop Y2K. Another thing about Liefeld and Kirby, and again, like you said, Liefeld didn't draw these issues, but if you're going to talk about Cable or Deadpool or like X-Force, the conversation's probably going to start and end with Rob Liefeld. That's just sort of how it is. When it comes, this sounds sacrilegious to a lot of people, but I feel like the other thing that Rob Liefeld was able to do that Kirby was able to do, especially in the 60s, and I think even more so in the early 70s that he gets credit for, is he captured that zeitgeist, and he did so with pictures that seemed like they were moving. Like you could feel, when you look at Youngblood or you look at Cable or you look at Deadpool, you can feel the energy coming out of him. You can feel how this guy would walk. You can feel how this guy would talk. There's just life and movement inside of still pictures that Liefeld brings that I think Kirby, in addition to like creating concepts and wanting to move forward, Kirby and Liefeld both do that crazy, just like, these guys just by looking at them, and you can feel them move when you see them. The other thing is, the reason it's also not bad is, and you should ask, speaking of X people who are like, synonymous with the series, ask Chris Claremont how many times they picked up some throwaway character idea because he was shot. He didn't have any more ideas at the time. He said this, like, and the Cindy said this, Louise Simonson has said this. They would come in and he'd be like, I don't have any ideas. And they go back through some stuff and find something that character he created or a little plot line and pick it up and go with it. So like G.W. Bridge, he's gone after like 97. Like nobody cares, but then he pops back up in 2007 in Punisher War Journal as a member of S.H.I.E.L.D. who's going after Frank Castle, which he had kind of done in the 90s too. So like you can pick, even if something gets cast aside, this is something that you can pick up again. And maybe there's new life in it, maybe there's not, but everything that is old will be new again. And even Kirby, he wanted to create new stuff, but he knew when it was time to bring dust off the Guardian, dust off the Newsboy Legion, get those guys back in here, dust off Captain America. It's time. So even that, if you create something and it goes by the wayside, it can recycle and come back again. And Liefeld understands that too, I think, on some level.
That's a really good point about Cap, because everything I've read said he was the one who was championing it. He was saying, like, if I'm going to come back here and work for you guys, can we at least bring back Cap? I understand it's the 60s now, but it'd be nice to bring him back. And that's one of the reasons he doesn't come back till Avengers 4, because they're going to make sure the book's not going to fold immediately. So You look back over a rich history, and there's always going to be something you can pull out and say, you know what, this is going to get another time to shine. Might work, might not work. Devil Dinosaur, right? For 20, 30 years, that character.
Great point.
A great comic, and for 20, 30 years, no one did anything with it. And along comes, Brandon Montclair, and he's like, I think I got an angle for that. And now it's getting a major adaptation. So things can always be brought back.
OMAC. I mean, you look at OMAC went from like a crazy sci-fi comic that honestly predicted the future as well as anything you can read from the 70s to being one of the central concepts of the DC universe, particularly in the wake of Infinite Crisis. Like, this was something that they keep going back to because there's so many ways to spin it. So, yeah, I mean, we're going off the subject here. Like, Jesse's like, we're getting out of here quick. I didn't know we were going to talk about OMAC, but this is where it goes. You know what I mean? Like,
I love it.
Like, just that energy. And you can, it's weird because you look at Cable, you look at OMAC, there's a lot more similarities there than you think. Like, just thinking about it, like, what? Look at him. I don't know. And that's the Kirby Liefeld analogy to me right there. Cable OMAC.
Well, next on the list is the young mercenary soldier. And at the beginning of this book, that's pretty much all he is. But as we go through, things change. And that is Kane, created by Fabian Nicieza, Rob Liefeld, first appearance X-Force #2, which I own that issue, July of 1991. Yeah, I am. I'm cashing in, baby.
I guess he's 14 because, like, he can't drink. They keep making fun. But how did he become, like, such a good mercenary at such a young age? I don't know. I'm sure it's explained somewhere. It's funny. I'm not the biggest Kane fan, although I do think his action figure is awesome. And I like that. And I love the Weapon X concept. I wonder where he fits into the weapon number system because he's also Weapon X. Is it like Final Fantasy? Like, now Logan is Weapon 10 and he's 10.2? You know what I mean?
It might very well be.
Might very well be. He fills the role that you would have in any buddy action movie. Well, not even buddy, but like you watch like The Dirty Dozen or you watch like The Expendables or anything like that. There's always like, I'm the young one who's a hothead who doesn't know anything. And the rest of them treat him like the rook that he is. And he does a good job, you know, in that role. I like his look. I just, for whatever reason, never grokked with me, but certainly love the look. Love that he has propeller hands.
Yes, dude. I was going to ask about that. It looked like a ceiling fan at the end of his arm. I was
I mean, which you know, honestly, doesn't sound as threatening as it actually would be.
Oh man,
you're like, I will look at my hand as a ceiling fan. You better watch the fuck out. What if it had like speed? You're like, hey, listen, are you chilly? Oh, you're not that chilly. Let me move this down. But no, like I said, I'm not the biggest Kane fan, but I do. I had the action figure, and I still had it.
Kane's such a great character because when I was young and I was buying this and I saw that there was a new character called Weapon X, I was thinking like, oh, he's going to be really important. You know, why else would you give him such a storied name from such an amazing run? And then, of course, you actually read the books and there's nothing there, right? I mean, he's this younger Cable. Cable's got one robot arm. Kane's got two robot arms. And then he's another one of these characters where I don't know that he's in another story once the 90s end. I'm sure he is somewhere, but, you know, not in any major way. So it's just one of those things where it's like, you know, you can create something at the time, and if you don't, you know, do the legwork and make them interesting in some way, they're just gonna fade away. And Kane's one of those characters where, like, I know Garrison Kane so well, but then he just stops because there's nothing else there. There's nowhere else to go. So I just find that fascinating that they were like, this is Weapon X. This is the big character. And there's nothing there, as opposed to like Logan, who's just like a drunken former lumberjack and he's got 16 movies and 100 million comic books. So.
Or even Deadpool, who they also connected to Weapon X, who at the same time they connected Kane to it. He got super, super over. Yeah. Also, let me just say, Garrison Kane is either the best or the worst fucking name I've ever heard in my life. And I don't know which, but it's only one of the two. I don't know, like, because I'm like, Garrison Kane, that sounds stupid. It does kind of roll, but Garrison? What? Like,
Garrison, you know, come on.
You know, it could be a name anytime, and that's something. You know what I mean? Like, this guy could have landed at Plymouth Rock, or he could be a hipster today. So, like, you got to give that name that, but at the same time, I don't know if I want to know anybody named Garrison. Anyhow, that's my thoughts on it.
I don't think I do know anybody named Garrison.
Why would you?
All right, next up on the list is Grizzly, the big red-furred mutant, got superhuman strength, endurance, reflexes, resistance to physical injury, heightened senses, and razor-edged claws. Created by Rob Liefeld, first appeared X-Force #8, January of 1992. Yeah, he's a big bear-looking guy, that's for sure. He's huge. I mean,
did you do that on purpose?
You did that on purpose, right?
You had to.
Maybe. Dean, what do you got to say about Grizzly?
Well, that's what I was about to talk about. Grizzly is obviously an homage to the Forever People's Big Bear, and I'm being generous by saying homage, and that like there are some times where it's pretty much just straight up the same guy. But again, like Rob Liefeld says, this is an echo. You could give him a lot of shit, for like using the echo or whatever. But honestly, like on some level, I'm just glad to see the design keep going. It's a great design, and like the character looks awesome. He's bigger than God and twice as strong, and he's got laser hammers like that. That's his thing. He's just through there just like crushing these dudes who look like a cross between minions and AIM beekeepers, and he's just like crushing them left and right and everything. He's cool to look at. Sometimes I take the piss and just be like, oh, just a carbon copy of Big Bear. But even if it is, and I don't think he's necessarily that, it's like I said, it's just cool to see him again. He's your prototypical big guy, strong, somewhat silent, says a funny thing every now and then. Everybody likes him.
Yeah.
The Little John of the mutants.
It's funny in this book. It's only 2 issues. Granted, they're oversized issues, but the story really focuses on about half the team. So Grizzly is a visually interesting character. He's got red skin. He's the big guy. He's he's someone you'd expect to see in a superhero lineup, but he doesn't get a lot to do here. But I kind of get that, because it's like you're not going to force a storyline in there. And again, in 1992, I don't know how many people would even have been familiar with the Forever People. They, even if you bring back Darkseid and Mr. Miracle every couple of years, Forever People don't tend to get a lot of reboots over at DC. So
they were around at this time because they were in Panic in the Sky, and they had a miniseries in like 90 or 91, but like, and they appeared. There's a New God series that ran like 89 to 91, and they appeared in it. But like you're saying, it's not like they were like, oh man, the Forever People, big posters everywhere, MTV ad campaign. Like it's the Ultra fucking verse.
Ultra verse. Yeah, exactly. They the Forever People weren't teaming up with Prime and Hardcase, unfortunately.
Right. And even if they were around, you're going to get a lot more play out of Grizzly at this time in an X-Force comic than you are in New Gods number 31 by Paris Collins and Mark Abanye, who I like. I like both of them. Yeah. But that's where the market was at the time.
Yeah.
Next up, G.W. Bridge. We kind of talked about him already. Trained in hand-to-hand combat, uses firearms quite a bit. Guild strategist. He's all-around military man, in my opinion. I mean, he kind of knows his way around a gun. He knows his way around a battle as well. Created by Fabian Nicieza, Rob Liefeld. First appearance, X-Force number 1, June of 1991. Dean, anything left you haven't said about G.W. Bridge?
I like G.W. Bridge a lot. Starting with that name, that's a great name for like a first lieutenant type guy in this kind of group. And then like when he goes on to be a SHIELD agent, like Agent G.W. Bridge, it sounds good. I like his appearances in X-Force, like later on when I think Capullo's doing it then. They're messing around with War Machine, like SHIELD's after them, and he's one of the guys coming after them, because he knows who they are, because he knows Cable. I like that. I like him later when he's a foil for the Punisher. Most importantly, one of the least likely characters that you would think you would have seen on X-Men the Animated Series, but he does have a cameo with these SHIELD agents like War Machine and Nick Fury and him, I think, when the Phoenix is showing up or something. I like that. I think that was cool. I remember seeing him in that cameo, and I'm like, that's G.W. Bridge. So, I mean, I mean, it's funny, but like, it was neat to see. Like Darry said, these felt like guys who were going to be very important, that were going to grow with me as I grew into an older fan. And that is not what happened, but I still appreciate the memories I have at that time when that seemed like that was what was going to happen. I think, honestly, G.W. Bridge has done pretty good, all things considered. He's treated fairly well in the Punisher War Journal run around, I want to say, 2007.
Okay.
From that run, from the Punisher War Journal run written by Mad Fraction, is my favorite line of dialogue of all time. So GW stands for George Washington. So the character's full name is George Washington Bridge, and
I know why he goes by GW now.
In that series, a character asks him if that's his real name, and he goes, "Oh yeah, it's a family name. My sister's name is Tappan Zee," which until very recently was the name of a bridge that connected Westchester, New Jersey, along the same river.
Yeah,
So,
we still call it the Tappan Zee. Ain't nobody calling that motherfucker the Cuomo.
no, that's fine. It's just I read that when that issue came out that week. I laughed then, and every time I've reread that series, I laugh since. So GW is in my memory for that line of dialogue.
It's really weird to like live here in the Northeast now, and I live in the Hartford area, so it's like smack dab between Boston and the New York City area. And like, it is wild how many more fucking references I get now. Even when I moved to Philadelphia, like, because I lived in Philadelphia for a year, like all of a sudden I was like, God, like this makes so much more sense to me now why this joke was made. And it also makes sense, like, you know, I'd read books and it would be about like people riding their bikes to corner stores and that kind of thing. You know, I was like, who the fuck rides there? Who does that kind of shit? Or like a picket fence with snow. I was like, I don't know about any of this. And then you're like, oh, well, like all the publishing houses are here. And now that I live here, they just write about what's going on here. So, you know, and I knew that to an extent, but until you get here, you don't realize how much that happens. That the people here and the culture here, they think the world ends probably about Washington, D.C. at best.
That's absolutely 100% true. I could tell you that for certain.
You know?
I do not think the world exists past, I don't know, let's say halfway through Pennsylvania.
Right. I feel like the people here, the world ceases to exist between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, but somehow you acknowledge Pittsburgh as a place. But like, there's like somehow nothing between. It's like the wastelands of Mega City 1, you know, like you just somehow get through it, you know, because people here will talk about Pittsburgh, you know, like, you know, in a way they won't talk about, say, Kansas City or Denver or, you know, Nolans or something. Like they don't seem like cities. Pittsburgh, about the same size as all of them, you know, somehow real to these people.
Yeah, I don't think Ohio is real, and I didn't know Pittsburgh was a city until I saw Dark Knight Rises. So yeah, I'm definitely the stereotype you guys are thinking of.
That's hilarious. I will say I have a neat little memory too that always brings every time I see GW's name. So my sister had my younger sister. I don't have any older sisters. My sister that she would get a videotape or an audio tape, and in the mid 90s, when she was a real little kid, she would have this little tape player. She ran around and she played every fucking thing over and over and over and over. She had a Sesame Street tape that had a song on there that was Ernie sang the song.
Hey, but I got one.
What?
And even if you've never heard it, the words are really easy.
Oh boy, oh boy.
So get this one.
Okay, here we go.
George Washington Bridge. George Washington, Washington Bridge. George Washington Bridge. George Washington, Washington Bridge.
Ernie.
It gets real sad now, Bert.
The other thing I want to say about Bridge before we move on is I really like Bridge for all the reasons we've talked about, but also I just like that he's one of these characters that they introduced who was a high-ranking SHIELD agent and shown to be like very competent and was black, and that was never made a big deal. Like his name is not like, you know, Black Nick Fury or something. He shows up, he's very good at his job, he's a career soldier, he respects his friends, he's taken the piss out of Gyrick, which is like the #1 standard of being a superhero in the Marvel universe.
True.
And I always thought that was great because he just
also he quit SHIELD for his like scruples, which is another requirement in the Marvel universe. At some point you have to tell SHIELD they're full of shit.
Yeah. But also he takes over. Like I remember when the Punisher is accused of killing Nick Fury. That was a story that hung around for a couple of years. And whenever SHIELD would appear in a different issue, you could almost, you know, see the editor saying like, oh, hey, Nick's dead. SHIELD is currently being run by this character called Colonel Bridge. He's got to be in it. And I remember reading books where Bridge would show up and Bridge would be like, what are you guys doing? SHIELD's got to clean up your mess now. And then it would just move on. And then a couple of years later, Fury came back and I was just like, oh yeah, cool. But I still miss Bridge. And then it was one of those things, like it was very natural. Like here's a new character. He exists. There's, you know, and everyone just moved on. And I just always thought like, that's great. Like you didn't make a big deal out of it. Just here you go. And he's a great character. So, you know, bring him back, please.
You know what he has, honestly? He has strong, like, Murtaugh energy from
Yeah.
Lethal Weapon. Strong
Absolutely.
Danny Glover is like, motherfucker, I'm too old for this shit. I don't want to do it. No, then he does a great job and he's really good at it and everything, but it is amazing. He's like the Batman movie. He's like, I just sat down and now I gotta go rescue the helicarrier. So and he's actually, when the helicarrier falls during Onslaught, he's on it.
Yes,
and him and Punisher work together to keep scavengers from taking all the good stuff, which is pretty funny because it's just like these meth heads on jet skis.
Right.
You think they can handle it, but it is a good story where they work together. It's like, hey, maybe Punisher's not so bad, but of course later on, G.W. Bridge never stops thinking Punisher is bad, and he's probably not wrong. But I just love that about him. He's crusty and he's and old and he's seen it all and he's not sure he wants to see anymore, but it always gets in his face.
And it's funny too because the period we're talking about, the early 90s, the Cold War has just ended. Fury is still very much a World War II character. Right. Fury is like I remember D-Day and I remember fighting Nazis and I remember all this other stuff.
Guadalcanal.
Exactly. He's not yet the Sam Jackson version who's like, no, I remember the Cold War, but Bridge is, Bridge is very much like, I've been on missions I can't tell you about, and I've gone to places and I've killed people that we're not allowed to acknowledge. And he kind of processes that. And you even see it here, when they go to the Kuiper Pass and everything else. And it's interesting because, 10 years before they would have the Sam Jackson, before they would have the Ultimate Fury, you do have Bridge with a very similar backstory. I could have seen, if you had told me that there was a Bridge miniseries that came out that showed him as a Fury-esque soldier, but in the waning days of the Cold War from this period of time, not only would I believe you, I probably would have bought it because I would have been like, oh yeah, that makes sense. What are the adventures you get up to before S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up at your door and hey, time to join off-brand G.I. Joe, guys. Technically, it's the other way around, but I guess now that we've had 10 years of the MCU, more people know who S.H.I.E.L.D. was. But for the longest period of time, every time I bring up S.H.I.E.L.D., someone would be like, oh, yeah, that's like G.I. Joe, but less fun, right? I'm like, yeah, sure, fine, great, good.
Let me do a quick intro for Hammer, and I'm going to turn it loose to you guys here for a second. So, Hammer, another skilled mercenary soldier. I didn't really see that he has any type of powers or anything. He's just kind of here as part of the six-pack created by Fabian Nicieza. Rob Liefeld, first appearance, X-Force number 8, January of 1992. Dean, what are your thoughts on Hammer?
All I really know about is what happens here, that he gets paralyzed, and then later he'll refuse to accept the cure that they bring back from Apple Crust, which is a terrible name, by the way. I do not like this name for future New York City. It's just, he doesn't. I understand why that's the name, and I get where it's coming from, but it does not sound as cool as they want it to. But mostly, I just know him from these issues that he remembers everything. He's a super pro. He acts like he doesn't like Kane, but he does. He fills that role, kind of the way that I can't remember the guy from Predator, but he gets mad when Sean Black dies.
Yeah, okay. I know.
I can't remember his name, but they're like, oh, I'm going to get him. You know what I mean? That's my friend, or then or even when Jesse the Body Ventura dies and the one guy's like, oh, this is it. They say, he has that relationship with Kane and he remembers everything. And thanks to his memories, Kane is able to track down Cable. But like I said, later on, he wants Hammer cured, but Hammer does not want the cure. Apparently the disease is better.
I'm with you. Yeah, I am not very familiar with this character. The first time I ever remember seeing him was as a trading card. And I was
Clear Ultra.
Yeah. And I was so confused because not only did I have no idea who he was, I don't know if I just didn't remember him from this series or what, but he had no powers. And I was like, wait a second, and you read this series and you see oh, he's super smart. He can build whatever the story requires. And then to see him be physically paralyzed in these issues is kind of interesting because it almost has I kind of expected him to turn into the villain of the piece because you're thinking
that makes sense.
Yeah, right. You super smart guy, former soldier of fortune, betrayed by his friends. Now he's restricted to a chair. He only has his mind. It's like, okay, comics have taught me you're going to build Ultron or some other nonsense, and the heroes are going to fight you for the next 50 issues. So,
and even in real life, a guy like that would have every reason to be bitter.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, betrayed by his friends, can't move, lives with his mom.
Yeah, right.
Okay, moving on to Stryfe. Let me tell you about the mystery of Stryfe, and how I was like, oh my gosh, who could this guy be? Now, going into this book, not much is known about Stryfe. This time, other than he was a sworn enemy to Cable. I did look it up, and apparently in April of 91, the readers get to learn that under the mask, and I think going into this book too, under the mask, you see New Mutants number 100. That's Cable's face.
Yeah, I had New Mutants number 100, and well, my friend did, and like I remember reading it, and being like, because also like you're like, at the end of that, you're like, Cable and Stryfe could be the same person. You know, you've never really seen them in the same place at the same time. You've only seen Cable picking on little mutant kids. This is very interesting stuff. I mean, yeah, it was a big deal to me.
Right. Yeah. Created by Louise Simonson, Rob Liefeld again. Here's the thing. They had it listed as Stryfe's first appearance as New Mutants 87.
Yes, I think they were both in this. They both appear for the first time.
So they're both in the same issue. Okay.
I have that, and I haven't read it in a while, so I probably won't get it out and read it though.
January of 1990.
You know, the thing about Stryfe, honestly, within the X-Men pantheon of villains, in a place where there's lots of over-the-top hams, he might be the most extra X-villain of all time. Like, he's just like if you read Stryfe Strike File, it's basically like a bunch of hateful emo poetry about like the people he does. Oh, these people are mean to me. You know, I think the thing about Stryfe though, coolest. It looks so cool. You couldn't help. He had a cool accessory with his action figure, this weird mace thing, and the helmet flipped up so you could see that he looked like Cable and all this. And when I was first getting into it before Executioner song, I probably started getting comic books like about 8 or 9 months prior when that came out. I was like, oh man, this is big. It felt like big time, and everything. And I don't know if they've ever done anything with Stryfe since 1996, maybe. I have no idea. But at the time, he was huge, and I liked the I'm not really making fun of him for being extra. Like, I liked the extraness of it. I liked how this guy was apparently Cable, but Shakespeare. So I enjoyed that, about it. Just like he was always speaking in riddles. For another wrestling person, Raven. I feel like they were very similar, powerful guys who could hold people under their thrall and who never quite told you what they were really up to. My favorite Stryfe story, though, of all time, happened at Dragon Con 2019, and I was cosplaying as NES Jason. Because that's how I roll, y'all. And I ran into these two guys who were cosplaying as Cable and Stryfe. And they were, oh my God, these costumes were on point. They were talking to me about the NES Friday the 13th game and shit. And all of a sudden, the Stryfe guy lifts his helmet. They're twins.
Oh, nice.
Really? I'm like, wow. Well
done.
Well done. Wow.
That's
wow.
great.
I wish I had stayed in contact with some really great guys, but that is honestly probably my favorite Stryfe story. Not my favorite Cable story, but my favorite Stryfe.
That is great.
Stryfe's an interesting character because I loved him when I was a kid. I was like, this guy's great. He's got this huge mask. He's got this arm. He's got this billowing red cape. Clearly. Yeah, exactly. Clearly, he is going to be an A-list, top-shelf supervillain, and he never does anything. But reading this now, there's this whole parallel narrative that kind of comes together that, again, I'm just making this up out of nowhere, but there's the Marvel villain Kang the Conqueror, and we know, and the characters know, that he will one day become Immortus, the leader of, time, the last person at the end of time, whatever it is. And it almost seems like there should be something similar going on with Cable and Stryfe, because we know Cable hates Apocalypse, the other big X-Men villain who's gotten a little bit more screen time, but Stryfe doesn't. Stryfe seems to be, with that and very excited for him. And Cable's already shown to be pretty old. And I always thought what if the reason Stryfe is wearing a mask is he's an even older version of Cable. Yeah. And, Cable just hasn't gotten there yet, but Cable's going to go through all this Soldier of Fortune, X-Force nonsense, and one day he's going to realize, you know what, I'm not changing anything, let me switch sides. And then that's Stryfe. Stryfe puts on the mask, comes back and says, listen, I'm going to wait for you to wise up, but I know I win. You can't beat me because I live this life as you. And, it's like a Megatron Galvatron thing, but that is nowhere.
We're like Warlock and the Magoose in the 70s.
Oh, right. I knew there was a better example than that. Okay.
Yeah, he's like, I'm just you 300 years from now, you fucking despotic Pope.
I can't wait until Adam Warlock is in the movies and now everyone can start talking about that Jim Starlin series, because that is the trippiest comic Marvel has ever made, and no one ever talks about it. I just can't wait until everyone is forced to read it.
Well, have I got a podcast for you? I have a buddy of mine by the name of Al Sedano does a podcast called, Resurrections, an Adam Warlock and Thanos podcast. They just finished up the death of Captain Marvel, which was really good. Yeah, that was really good. But anyway.
Jim Starlin obviously worked out his issues with the Catholic Church and the government of the United States of America and war in those issues. Like, you can read it and you can see exactly how this is. And also like his own duality and that kind of thing, but especially those big three. Like in the Warlocks, in the Strange Tales Warlock, to be specific.
Well, to round this character discussion out, and you guys do not have to comment because I did not, like I said, Mutant Liberation Front, we're just going to call it that. There's a bunch of characters that pop up in this book, all with all sorts of different abilities. My notes for the Mutant Liberation Front are they're a terrorist organization of mutants upset with how mutants are being treated, brought together and led by Stryfe. Created by Louise Simonson, Rob Liefeld. First appearance, New Mutants 86, December of 1989. Yeah, these are the characters that are kind of doing Stryfe's bidding.
Number one, I think Dragoness is a character that predates the Mutant Liberation Front. Like she fought, I don't know if it's the same person, but they look exactly the same because she fought Black Widow in Marvel Fanfare that George Perez did. And it's really good. Dragoness has a great look. With the wings and that cool helmet and everything. Reaver's a semi-important character for a little bit. He makes the jump to the Ultraverse and they try and develop him some. For whatever reason, he always reminds me of the lead singer of Green Day. I'm not really sure why. I think they look like each other in some weird way in my mind. They
what
probably
is his
really
name?
don't.
Billy Joe
Armstrong?
Armstrong, there you go. Okay, yeah. All right.
I think at that time, now they don't really, when he had the short hair and everything. Mutant Liberation Front might be the greatest name for a group ever. Honestly, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants is a stupid name because nobody who's with the exception of Dungeons and Dragons or DC or Marvel deities who embody concepts, they're physical, embodiments of those things. Nobody's well, I'm the evil guy. Darkseid does, but Magneto does it. Like Doctor Doom does it. Even the Joker, I'm not really evil. This is just the way fucking things are. You're just an idiot. You know what I mean? So very few characters do that, and especially groups that have political aspirations. The last thing you want is bad branding. So Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, a terrible name. The Mutant Liberation Front was in line with the language that was utilized around the time. The Palestinian Liberation Organization, the Symbionese Liberation Army, which they're not good people, but this is the liberation was a big word for these kind of things. There's
it sounds like you're bringing
the Kurdish Liberation Front was another one at the time. Although they've gotten absorbed in the KPP since. Don't worry about it. Nobody cares but me and the Kurds, obviously. Well, they should. God bless them. But this was really good language to get across what they were doing. You're what's an X-Man? What's an X-Force? The Mutant Liberation Front. Oh, they think mutants are oppressed and they would like them to have equal rights, and they're probably going to engage in what are perceived to be terrorist activities to do so. They will call themselves freedom fighters. Nothing but respect for that name. Whoever came up with that, and that feels like a Rob thing, just fucking brilliant.
They have an acronym that I don't think has aged well. No. They couldn't possibly have foreseen that, obviously, but it is hilarious to read these issues and see that and have to take a second back and be like, oh, yeah, right. That's what that would be.
Oh, there's no I.
Yeah. You gotta look at that quickly. And it's funny too. I don't know if you guys have ever read the one-shot Doom Force, which is the X-Force parody that Grant Morrison did when they were working on the Doom Patrol. It's one of those parodies that really works as an example of what it is parodying. And if you had told me that the villains in that were the MLF and somehow an I were worked in there, I'd be like, oh, absolutely, no questions asked. And that's what this felt like at times, where it's is there not going to be a Venture Brothers character that pops out of the woodwork and goes, wait, maybe you guys should workshop that name a little bit? But again, it's 92, so they were clearly copying the PLO or whatever.
Right. It would have aged better if they were the MLO, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, if they were, but front sounded cool. Like it was like what people said at the time. I mean, like again, I think it's still a cool name. The acronym is not great.
I love.
Well, look at All Star Squadron. Now they knew. They knew.
He knew. Yeah. But the MLF is another great example of what I was talking about before, which is just like new character. Like, are they going to work? No, probably most of them are not, but at least you're trying. At least you're coming up with something new. And again, to Dean's point, occasionally you get a really good design and someone just looks at that and it gets burned in their memory. And 20 years later, they're like, oh man, what was that Zero about? Can I bring him back? You know, you never know where it's going to go.
I mean, honestly, you can shit on him, and I get why you would, but Forearm looks cool. And I understand, like, there should be a guy named Forearm who has 4 arms. Like, honestly, the only real question is why it took until, like, 1990 to get that done.
Yeah, my favorite, I'm with you. I love Reaper. I thought he had just a great, simple design. I now cannot unsee the Green Day connection, so thank you very much for that. But you know, it took me a while to remember, like, oh, Marvel already had a character called like the Grim Reaper,
right?
And I always thought he was incredibly boring. And again, it was one of these things where it was like Rob took the basic conceit of that. They both, even by the end of this series, he's even got a hand that was replaced with a scythe, which was the other Grim Reaper's defining characteristic. And it's like, this one works for me just a little bit more. I'm not sure why, but a little bit more. So again, I just like the new ideas. You throw them all out and you see what sticks.
Well, I mean, I think that this Reaper, like, we don't ever learn a ton about him, it seems like, but it seems like there's something to him. He obviously believes something, or he wouldn't be in the Mutant Liberation Front. The Grim Reaper has a great visual, and I love his look. He doesn't mean anything aside from he's Eric Williams. He's Wonder Man's brother. If you watch, like, the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Hero cartoon, I think he's really cool there, where he has other motivations and does other things. And he's, like, working for Hydra. In the comic books, Eric Williams is like, oh, I miss my brother.
Voiced by Lance Henriksen, right? Am I making that up?
Oh, really?
Oh, man. I know it didn't come out in the 90s, but anyone listening to this who has not watched Earth's Mightiest Heroes, best Avengers adaptation outside of the movies. Freaking flawless. It is on Disney Plus. It is worth every second of your time.
Yeah, it's great.
All right, guys. Well, we have definitely put some work into talking about the characters that show up in this book. So now you guys get to sit back and listen to me talk, because what I want to do is I'm going to do a nice little synopsis of both of these issues. Might take about 5 minutes, so grab you a drink, whatever. And then we will then reconvene here and talk about your guys' notes on the issues as well. So here we go. The past. All right, that's where we want to start things. Good place to start usually. The past. So in these 2 issues, we learn about the Wild Pack, a mercenary team, 6-pack, mercenary team who later became known as the 6-pack, that runs international missions for a man named Tolliver. The team consists of Cable, Domino, Kane, Grizzly, GW Bridge, and Hammer. On a mission in the mid-'80s, they head to Khyber Pass in Afghanistan to fight off some Soviets. The team soon find a hidden installation, and once inside, they encounter some resistance, but also notice that the facility seems oddly new. Unnerved, Cable gets the team to head further into the facility to find the leader of those they are fighting, Stryfe. Stryfe claims he is working for Tolliver as well and ends up winning the battle, causing the 6-pack to retreat. The team is also upset with Cable for going off script and breaking a contract to attack Stryfe. Now, 8 months pass as the 6-pack have been on the run, being hunted and frequently attacked by those that serve Tolliver. So something happened. I guess Tolliver got upset with what they did, and now he's going after the 6-pack. Cable tries to convince the team they need to deal with Stryfe first, and they are having a hard time trusting him, but decide to follow his lead. As the 6-pack hone in on Stryfe's location, they invade his compound to try to take the fight to him. Stryfe, however, is ready for him, taking Kane by the neck and threatening to kill him. When Stryfe says he will release Kane for a data disk that I think they had taken from his facility, Hammer immediately agrees and goes to make the trade, but before he can get there, Cable shoots Hammer in the back. So, as Stryfe teleports away, the compound begins to explode. Desperately trying to stop Stryfe from escaping, Cable time jumps out of there, leaving the rest of the team to fend for themselves. And most of the team is able to make it out except for Kane, who ends up losing his arms and legs in the explosion. Now, let's go to the present day. Presently, Cable's tracking the operations by the Mutant Liberation Front, an organization of mutants doing the bidding of Stryfe. It seems lately they have been targeting museums, stealing ancient artifacts, and Cable is trying to anticipate their next move so that he can find and have his final confrontation with Stryfe. Now, with the belief that Cable is Stryfe, S.H.I.E.L.D. agent G.W. Bridge finds the new Weapon X, Kane, and tells him that Cable has returned and that he wants him brought in. Kane travels to Hammer's home to find him still paralyzed as a result of Cable's shot to the back and in a wheelchair. Kane requests a list of old safe houses that Cable may be in order to track him down. Sometime later, as Cable is unraveling the location of Stryfe, Kane appears outside looking to face off with him. The two begin to fight, and when Kane finds a moment, he shows Cable a holographic image of Stryfe, removing his helmet to uncover Cable's face underneath. Cable stops cold, struggling to understand what is going on, but one thing is for sure, he wants answers. Kane and Cable put aside their differences and decide to place a tracker on an artifact that Stryfe will steal next. Successful, they track the artifact to Mexico, unaware that Stryfe is actually expecting them. Once they arrive at the location, the MLF attacks, and the pair realizes they have walked into a trap. Stryfe is caned by the neck once more and says he will release him in exchange for control of Cable's computer, Professor. Cable agrees, and as Kane is released, Cable incinerates the Professor data disk before giving it to Stryfe. Enraged, Stryfe lets loose an attack that rocks Cable to his core, but Kane is able to intervene using an electromagnetic attack that takes Stryfe down but destroys his own arms in the process. Cable grabs Kane and transports both of them into the future to escape. Awakening, Kane finds his arms have been repaired and look human. He's like looking at his arms. They aren't robot arms anymore. They look human. And as Cable actually took him to the future to get him fixed up with some future tech. Kane asks Cable if saving him was worth not getting to Stryfe, and Cable says he'd do it again and not change a thing. So there you go. Ladies and gentlemen, that is 2 issues in 1 synopsis. What are your thoughts, Dean Compton? Man,
they're good buddies. I like it. It's like you said, it's a rollicking action adventure, an action adventure movie, basically. This might have been the first time I saw the Silver Samurai, which is pretty cool because he's like the only villain who ever fought Cable and John Belushi. So kudos to him.
Nice.
The Stryfe thing, like, it's weird that, like, to me, that Kane thinks Cable and Stryfe are the same because he's been in the same place where, like, Cable and Stryfe were, like, not in the same, like, Stryfe was holding him. He was looking at Cable, like, I think part was,
we had this discussion offline.
We did. And y'all were like, maybe it's like a future thing. I don't know, but, like, this confused me then. It still confused me now. Also, what's funny, there's a part in the second issue where, like, Cable uses a teak shield against the Mutant Liberation Front. And he's like, am I just being soft because they're kids? These kids are fighting a war. But, like, the issue before, he shot fucking Sumo in the head. He killed this guy. He marked him, like, right through the head. And it's a great shot. Like, it might be the best shot. Like, this bullet right through. It might be the best panel in the book. But, Sumo, who's apparently his mutant ability is to be a sumo wrestler because, like, that's what he's doing. But, like, he's dead, and, like, but then later he's like, am I soft on him? I was like, I don't think you're very soft on Sumo.
Nah, dude. Wow.
I enjoy Cable's monologue to himself. I think it's neat to watch him, like, make these changes. Not necessarily in real time, but you're seeing Cable then and Cable now. I don't know if I'm different, like, values-wise than I was when I was, like, 25, but certainly I'm calmer, and a lot of things that I would have thought were more important battles to win, I don't even fight them anymore because, you got to really pick which hill you're going to die on, and I think Cable has decided that he's no longer going to allow his friends to die on the hills that he's chosen. And I think that that's really cool to watch Cable come around to that. When Kane loses, like, his arms and legs for whatever reason, like, I didn't know this song at the time, but later on I would be introduced to Metallica's One. And so, like, every time I read this synth, it's like, like And I like the song. Don't get me wrong. It's very sad and long, but it's a good song. Like I could just see Kane just sitting there like playing this over and over again. And everybody else, like you said, everybody here is pretty interesting. They do their own thing. Kudos to Fabian for, like, if you're looking at the timeline in real time, the six-pack stuff would have happened in like 88, and he has the Dodgers in the World Series on the TV, and they're up in game 6, but the 88 series only went 5 games. So, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm not shitting on him. I'm saying way to put that to 6 so that nobody can say, well, that was 88. Look at this. The Dodgers, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of a nod that this would have been 88. The Dodgers are winning the game, but they're winning game 6, and it's not over. So I think that's cool to give it a real grounding and make it feel like of its time without, like, chaining it to that time. Like, if you're me, you see what's going on, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Those are some of my big things. I'll probably just interrupt Darry in a minute and tell him he's wrong, so I'll let him go ahead and talk.
Well, hold on. I gotta get this discussion in here real quick.
All right, let's hear it.
So, reticle eye, cybernetic eye, okay? Do you think they function the same?
Well, here's the thing about, like, Cable's eye, and maybe it's just been answered, I don't know. His body, he's not really a cyborg, right? Like, it's a techno-organic virus he's keeping in check. So, like, is his eye even cybernetic? I don't know. He put a torch in his one hand in this, which is pretty neat. I don't know how that works here. I think an eye with actual crosshairs on it, more useful. Cable's flaring-ass telekinetic eye, cooler. In most cases. Personally, I think Deadshot's eye is, like, the cooler.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was going to raise a stink about how Cable shoots Hammer in the back. Why not just shoot the disc? And like go on about yourself.
I was going to say the same thing. I was like, even if you didn't shoot the disc, like you can't shoot this guy in the leg. Like, why do you have to shoot? I better shoot this guy in the spine.
I'm sorry I had to do this to you. And I'm like, yeah, dude, like, just take him out some other way. Don't paralyze this guy. It really speaks to the obsession that Cable has with Stryfe. I mean, even in the past, when he leaves them there to fend for themselves when the place is exploding around them, he's like, I cannot let this guy go. And he time slips out of there, leaving this team that he's been hanging around with for years to possibly die. That's how obsessed he was. And so you make it
later on, he time slides with Kane. He could have time slid them out of there.
You would think. I don't know. But I understand that also gives him the arc of growth here, where we can see that at the end of this, he's like, okay, I'm going to save my friend. I'm going to pick my friends over my obsession.
Yeah, and I mean, also, like, it's the future time stuff. Like, maybe he feels like he can't let them know that he can time travel and all that stuff at that point. For reasons you're saying, it's like it's better if they die in a cave-in than go to apple crust. But, I get it. I mean, sometimes time travelers make choices like that. So that's probably what it's more along the lines of.
Right.
But and add in his obsession like you're talking about.
Right. All right, Darry, what you got, man?
Well, first thing, before I forget to mention this, I don't know if either of you or any of you listening at home read these issues, Cable, Blood and Metal, on the Marvel Unlimited app. But if you do, the scans appear to be from the Australian edition, which I got a kick out of because on the very first issue, it says $3.80 AUS, which I had not seen before. I've seen the Canadian one, I've seen the American one, and I just thought that was cool because it's one of those things where it's like you really got to be looking for it. And I don't know who's responsible for scanning these or getting these on there, but it probably didn't even occur to them. So that was just
David Finn from Signal of Doom. Everybody should check it out. It's a good thing, but he probably did it because he's fucking like that. He'd come over here and be like, I want Australia to be repped a little bit. That's like,
yeah. I'll tag him in this fucking episode. Thanks for the scan, bro.
Right.
That's great.
The other thing that I wanted to mention was, you guys mentioned basically how terrible Cable is at making decisions, and that was something that I was thinking about in this too, because you have these two issues where Cable at no point does he make a good decision. And if you think about it, that's kind of consistent over his entire arc. And it's funny too, because it's like we forget, but he's an old man, right? He's at least as old as Professor X. He's lived for decades, but most of that's been in this post-apocalyptic hellscape. And even at times when he's had access to, the good life, he's still fighting, he's still dealing with everything else. So he must have like the most advanced and most complex version of PTSD ever seen in fiction. Because not only is he
I
dealing
don't know.
with
Wolverine wants to have a word.
yeah, right, exactly. But with Cable, it's like I'm not sure who my parents are. I'm fighting a despot that's been around since the High Kingdom of ancient Egypt. He's got a chronic medical condition. He's also, as strong a psychic as any of the other characters that we know of. And you kind of factor this all into this guy who's been fighting a war for decades, who doesn't blink at drafting a bunch of child soldiers and New Mutants and then almost immediately letting them down. And it's kind of like, oh yeah, Cable's got issues, I don't know if it's intentional, but the things we're pointing out, like, well, why did he shoot him in the back? Well, because that's what someone who's not thinking straight is going to do. That's the most obvious solution, right? You want to stop someone, you shoot them in the center mass, and you hope for the worst. So it's one of these things where it's like, I'm very fascinated by the fact that Cable is this traditional Marvel character where he's got incredible power, but he's got just as many drawbacks to go with it, right? Like, how many people would introduce a character who's like, oh, he's got nearly unlimited psychic energy, but he can't use any of it because if he does, he's going to turn into this metal hunk. Like, that's the most Marvel origin I've heard since like Donald Blake. So it's one of those things that I really like about the character. And I think it's one of the reasons we're still talking about him 30 something years later when, Hammer, who could be very interesting, hasn't come back.
Hammer number -.1 will be coming out anytime now.
There is a character named Hammer in the new Star Trek show who I have, I guess you would call it a crush on at this point. And that was all I was thinking of when I was reading this is I really want this character to be voiced by Bruce Hordak in something going forward, even though the two characters have nothing to do with each other. And that actor is white. But anyway, I think Cable is incredibly messed up. And I think if you look at it through that lens of a guy who hasn't had a chance to process all the awful things he's been through, then a lot of these decisions make sense because it's like, oh yeah, people keep putting you in positions of authority and positions of leadership because you've survived war before, but maybe you shouldn't, maybe you should take a step back. And of course he would tell you, well, if I do that, the giant blue mutant is going to kill all your children. And again, I go back to the idea of like, well, maybe he already did and you're not going to change that. So that's how I viewed this story.
Yeah, an interesting thing, you're talking about Cable, and you see it here as well. There are bad decisions contextually, but if it's somebody who's like the first 35 years of their life are like literally in a war. They grow up in a war zone. They're a child soldier themselves. They're, and like you said, they kind of become like a battlefield sergeant, battlefield general by attrition. But at the same time, you make decisions that are the most efficient, that conserve the most of your resources. So yeah, what are you going to do? I'll shoot fucking Hammer in the spine because like that means he can't hurt me later. All of these things, it takes care of all of these issues that could possibly come up. I think it's really cool to see this too, because in a few issues, he's going to come back to X-Force. Like I think around X-Force 25, 26. And like he actually, I don't know exactly where it goes. I can't remember. But he tries to be nicer. Like at one point, Shatterstar's like flipping the channels as fast as he can. And he's like, hey, he just programs the computer to do it for him. Like, hey, change the channel every 0.3 seconds so he can just stop hitting the button. And he tries, and it's not like he's like, oh, I'm a softie now. But he realizes that for people to be efficient, you can't treat them like they're automatons, that soldiers are also people. And if he wants to be the best soldiers he can be, he needs to know and enjoy their company on an individual level, which he probably should have already known because he had been a goddamn soldier for a long time. But apparently he had to relearn it again because I think that just happens to us. Cable's been around forever, and every one of us finds different ways to make the same mistakes again. So that's probably what he did here.
The other thing I want to mention before we get too far into this art is by John Romita Jr., who I am just the biggest fan of. I mean, obviously his decades on Spider-Man and pretty much everything else he's ever drawn. But this 2-issue series is a product of its time because there are some splash pages and full shots that just they only work here, but they work here really well because they are what you expect to see in a comic inspired by Rob Liefeld. And again, I'm not saying that as a negative. because a lot of this works. And when I read this originally when I was a little kid, I was like, oh yeah, this is what comics should be. Like issues like this are why I didn't think Avengers or Fantastic Four or Justice League were worth reading until years later, because I was like, you don't have full splash pages of a guy with a robot arm and a glowing eye jumping out of the rafters with two giant guns. Why would I read a book with Bloodwind or the Proctor? That doesn't make any sense.
Batman's got some pouches, but none of the rest of them have any.
That's a bad example. I wouldn't have read a Batman comic back then if my life depended on it. I'll barely read one now. But,
talking about how this looks like Rob Liefeld, if memory serves, he was supposed to have drawn this. And
okay.
You know, I mean, again, don't quote me on this. I recall reading this somewhere, though. You can put it in the podcast if it's wrong. I have no problem being corrected. But like JR came on in like a hurry as a pinch hitter, which, you know, sort of tracks because Youngblood drops in April of 92. This drops in like October of 92. Yeah. So it would make the timeline adds up that they would have thought he was going to do, you know, 2 issues of this. And honestly, according to what I understand, he did still think he was going to do it. Like Rob Liefeld and Jim Valentino like thought they could do Marvel and Image stuff at the same time. Yeah. And Marvel was like, actually, we don't deal with people we feel pissed on our faces. You know, we don't. You can argue whether they did or not. I don't think they necessarily did. They made the best business decision they could for themselves. But Marvel thought it was insulting, like businesses always do, whenever a worker is like, hey, I'd like what I deserve. So, you know, I mean, so Marvel's like, no, we're not going to work together. But that would track. And I remember reading this that it had to be turned out in a hurry. And it would make sense. It's like, make it as Liefeld-y as you can.
Update.
Hey, just breaking in here real quick. Decided I'd ask Liefeld himself. I reached out to him on Twitter. The question I asked was, hey, Rob Liefeld, were you supposed to be involved in Cable, Blood, and Metal prior to the Image Exodus? And Rob responded with, it's based on my notes/outline that I gave editorial as I was going to write and draw it. It's why it's so reflective of my work. So, there you go. Right from the man himself, Rob Liefeld. Back to the show.
Yeah. I hope the sequence of events was most of the founding partners are in the Marvel conference room telling them they're not going to work for them anymore and trying to get out the door to go across the street and do the same thing to DC. And one of the editors, probably the X-Men editor, I guess, is running around. Bobby Boy is running around to all the offices going, who can draw this? Because we're pretty sure we just lost Liefeld. And JR Jr. sitting in a room and they know he's royalty because they're, you know, considering who his father was. And it's like, you're going to draw this. And then, 60 days later, this came out. But
and he had just done the Hot Punisher run, the Punisher Warzone, which, Punisher Warzone #1 sold 1 million copies, like literally 1 million copies. You know what I mean? So, like, this is a guy who was one of the few names they had. Who do they have left as an artist name at that point? JR, Ron Lim. I don't know who the next guy would be after those two. I know we wind up with some great guys, like Greg Capullo comes along, et cetera, But at that time, that moment, I think it's just those two, and I don't think Lim could have done this justice.
No, I think JR is perfect for this book. And again, to your point, I mean, he's aping what's important of that style, which is always JR's strength. Every one of his books don't necessarily look like each other. Like, yeah, he's got the same blocky shape, but he knows what he's working on. He's been doing this long enough. And I definitely feel that here because it feels like a Liefeld book, even though Liefeld had very little to do with it. So that was a big selling point for me. Like I said, I bought these off the racks, but I would never get rid of these just for the art alone. I think if you like that type of stuff, then this is an excellent example of that period of time. And then just the little details. This is the only time I can remember seeing Cable wearing reading glasses for some reason. There's a random scene where he's like pushing the glasses up the bridge of his nose like he's an anime character. And I got a kick out of that because I really like the idea that he can go into the far, far, far future, fix paralysis, regrow arms. And then he's like, no, astigmatism, I'm taking that back with me. I'm taking a stand. I like the way the glasses look.
I was gonna say, I think he just looking. It's like why people wear a watch now. You have no reason to wear a watch. You carry a phone with you everywhere you go that will tell you what time it is. People only wear a watch as a fashion thing. He just likes the way he looks.
You know what?
He's like, look how much smarter I am.
Headcanon accepted, because I kind of like that. I kind of like the idea that his eyes are actually fine, and he puts it on because he likes the way it looks. So
well, I mean, look at him. You see a few little things like this in here, like he's got a New York Jets mug.
Yeah, I noticed that.
And I think this is one of those little things. I'm glad you brought the glasses up because I forgot. I think it's one of those little things that you're supposed to be like, oh, Cable is also a person and not this, subcommandante Commander X.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. I wanted to bring that up, and I thought that was just maybe Romita at the time, but yeah, it's like, oh, I'm Cable. I got a ring of safe houses in the most beautiful parts of the world, and I lead my team on these missions, and we never lose a guy. But I also have a fully functioning time machine I only use when it's convenient, and I have this super intelligent AI I've named after an old X-Man. So yeah, he's a guy with flourish, I would say.
You know, another thing I really liked here that JR did, and I don't know if it was, and Fabian may have done it, whoever had the idea, is the six-pack's weapons are fairly personalized.
Yeah.
I know Kane and Hammer and GW Bridge all use guns, but if you look, they're slightly different. Domino's got this power staff, and like I said earlier, Grizzly's got these two freaking anti-Mjolnir hammers that are just they look like they're cackling with negative zone energy, and it's really badass. And I think that when you look at these guys, you get a sense of their personality. Like Domino's the one who can handle tight situations, counterintelligence, counter-espionage, etc. Grizzly, you look at him, you knew, but then you see the big hammers, man, I hope we have to knock something down. And in between, if you look at their weapons, you can kind of see that Cable is also a tank. Kane is more of a skirmisher. Hammer is somewhat of, they all kind of like wind up on the same spot, because of it is. But if you look at their weapons, you can kind of see what they were tailor-made for. And I think that was a cool little touch too.
I give Mr. Nicieza a lot of crap when we do his stuff, but there's one very consistent thread, which is he always makes a point of telling a story, which I think is very important, because a lot of people just, they crap out 20 pages and they move on with their lives. But he makes sure you get a story. And I really like the fact that over the course of these two issues, the good guys and the bad guys are chasing all these random MacGuffins, which allow the characters to have staged battles. Dean mentioned the Silver Samurai and Clay Nishida show up. You get to tour a little bit of the Marvel Universe, particularly the X Corner. And I don't know if it's JR Jr. or if it was in the original script, but they're all apocalypse themed, right? Because we know as readers, apocalypse has been around since ancient Egypt, so it makes sense he's traversed the world. And it was one of those things that I really liked, because even though it's not fleshed out here, and again, most of the things introduced in this book are not fleshed out in the two issues. I don't know if Nicieza knew he'd be able to continue it. I think he writes the ongoing series or whatever.
He does start off writing Cable, and he's writing X-Force at this time. Which, so he had to play. So maybe some of this stuff pays off there, but when you're looking at this, why are they collecting this apocalypse junk? But I just decided that was something to be revealed later, not a plot hole. But
exactly.
Right now, personally. But when I first read it, I was upset, but then I had to read it twice before I got that.
But I like that too, because to your point, I didn't think it was a plot hole, because again, this is two issues written in 92. He's not writing for the trade. He knows you're going to be back in the store after issue 2, and if you see Cable or X-Force, you're probably going to pick it up. I did. I mean, again, I'm not faulting him in any way, but I like that, because it's they're collecting all these artifacts. Why? Why does Stryfe want them? Is there some if you assemble all of these things, is there a way to stop Apocalypse? Does he not want Cable to do that? Did the 12 hide stuff ceremoniously around the world? I don't know, but I'm curious about it. So again, it's one of those things where I like having the characters have something to do, and I just want to give Nicieza credit on that, because it makes it flow easier. He builds the character work around the spine of actually having them do something. And then the other good thing about the MLF, which is why they work so well as a Cable and an X-Force villain, is they're cannon fodder. Cable is The Punisher does not have a great rogues gallery because most villains don't go up against the Punisher more than once. He's not Spider-Man. He's not putting you in Ravencroft and hoping for the best. Cable's the same way. He's not rehabilitating you. He's not throwing you in a 21st century jail. So it's really interesting to see him fight sumo or samurai or kamikaze or dragoness or any of these other characters. He's probably going to shoot you in the head if it makes his life easier. So I find it really interesting that the MLF can keep drafting young mutants, and some we know, like Rusty and Skids are both in here. They were characters that predate Rob Liefeld's tenure in the X office. So again, it's all these things where it's like, it's not necessarily what you expect when you pick up an X-Men book, but I enjoyed it and I think it really holds up.
Yeah, like you said, like when it comes to the MLF, like you barely see like half of them. Like I think you only see Wildside for a second. You don't see Forearm at all. You don't see the guy with the knife from Madison Square Garden in the Carnage series. Like just stabbing guys, he's ready. He might be a mutant. You know what I'm saying? Like he can threaten the MLF.
Please.
He might be. He
could be a mutant. Look, he stuck that big knife in the Madison Square Garden. Maybe he's got invisible knife. Maybe that's his power. I don't know. But like he could be in the MLF. That's all I'm saying.
Oh man.
Who do you want to write that story? I mean, who?
Alan Moore.
You know, the climax of Watchmen takes place in Madison Square Garden. I'm saying he's done it before.
If he was there, he stabbed somebody. I don't, I mean, if he wasn't one of the people who died, he absolutely stabbed a motherfucker. Because why wouldn't you at that point if you're that guy? You know?
I know they did an entire arc of all the bit characters in that Watchmen show. I wish he had been in that. It's like he could have been the Mormon missionary or stabbing a squid or something like that, but he didn't make an appearance.
So I enjoyed what we got here. We get a story that kind of shows you the relationship between Cable and Stryfe. And I mean, we kind of get that all-important moment where Cable gets the realization that the person that he has been going after all these years could possibly either be him or certainly looks like him. What the hell is going on? It definitely is kind of an important step in the Cable
too, because honestly, when I read Cable other places around the same time, Executioner song, it seemed like Cable always knew they looked the same. But I guess this is where you learned that, But like, yeah, but what a moment! What a fucking moment!
Right, dude. As for you guys were talking about JR and his art, and look, I'm not the biggest art critic or anything like that. I know what I feel looks good and what I gravitate towards. I love his art. I don't know, for me, I don't know if it's the inker that's kind of turning me off here. Dan Green's the inker, but you guys were talking about how there could have been a rush to get this done. I kind of get that vibe a little bit.
Yeah,
I'm just going to say that.
I also remember, and I don't know if this wound up the intention or whatever, but y'all remember those American Entertainment This Month ads? Right, well, I remember they had a thing for Cable, and it had the cool logo, which was like, his logo's like that sideways diagonal X-Men X-Force type thing. And like it said, the origin of Cable revealed. And first off, absolutely not. If that was what was going on, no. But I wonder if that was the original thing, but they just went with, we'll tie it. But I mean, there is some origin stuff here, but not an origin per se. And maybe American Entertainment was just, bullshit. Probably wouldn't be the first time. But like, I remember reading that before, seeing that in the comic before I read this and feeling like I did not get that. But like maybe if it was rushed, that was the original intent, and they just make or that was like, hey, actually don't do that. Just keep it really mysterious. I wonder what happened with that.
That's a very good possibility. I mean, this is a very fluent time for Cable too. I mean, at this point, he's what's being revealed in the other books, what's not being revealed. Okay, should we reveal this now? Maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should hold back and leave a few things vague.
He's about to be dead in quotes.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, hey, I think we covered a good bit here. As short as I thought this was going to be, I think we did a fantastic job in talking a lot about the X universe, especially, Cable and Stryfe and everything that surrounds them. Anything left unsaid here, guys? I will give the floor to you, Dean. We'll start with you. What are your final thoughts?
Well, my final thoughts on these two issues are absolutely worth reading. Get them on Unlimited, probably not super expensive. They're part of the recent Executioner song Epic collection. So, get them there. But one of the things that as I was reading this, that got me thinking was a lot of Marvel characters and Marvel villains have kind of a DC analog, and it's usually obvious to see. But like, I started thinking about like, who's Apocalypse? Who's the Apocalypse analog in DC? And the guy I came up with, I think it's a little offbeat, but like, and I want to get y'all's opinions. It's Mordru. It's the guy from Legion of Superheroes. He was
I
never
like
born.
that.
He will never die.
Yeah.
He has all of these plans that have been going on since the dawn of time that apparently stretch until the end of time.
Yeah.
He's not a mutant, but he certainly uses weird technology the way Apocalypse does. And his magic almost makes it up for, makes it different. That was the best analogy I could come up with from a DC character.
I like that a lot, especially because in my head I always equate the Legion with the X-Men. So that's a really good lineup, because you're talking about like, the Legion is rolled around time travel and they can fight Mordru in any period of time. And it's the same thing with Apocalypse. Whenever a character goes back to, sands and pyramids and whatnot, you probably are going to fight Ensabanur at some point.
Right.
So I think narratively those two are really closely related. I would have never made that connection. Well done.
Or if you go back in time in the Marvel Universe, the Two Gun Kids, you'll fight Apocalypse and Kang.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Here's the raw
like evil oil barons or something.
6 shooters. But honestly, I love it. It's one of my favorite things about the Marvel Universe is somehow everything happened.
Right.
My favorite thing about the Marvel Universe, and I was just talking to this about a bunch of people, is it starts with Namor, the Submariner, and the Human Torch, like having a fight that pretty much destroys half of New York City. Yeah. And then the second we are in World War II, all the characters are granted blanket amnesty, and they're like, as long as you're fighting Access powers, we don't care what you did beforehand. And then Ed Brubaker in the Marvels project would make that canon of like someone sitting in a room with Namor going, listen, we know you did a lot of bad stuff, but you seem to want to kill Nazis, so we're not going to make a big deal, and we're going to tell everyone you're Cap's friend. Are you cool with that? And he's like, you're going to let me kill Nazis, right? It's like, oh yeah, don't worry. Yeah. And then Human Torch, it's the same way. I mean, Human Torch starts off as like a retelling of the Frankenstein story, and then suddenly it's like, oh no, you're a policeman. In fact, you've always been a policeman. You're a nice Irish guy. You're going to go kill Nazis. Specifically, you're going to burn Hitler to death. And he's like, yeah, that sounds like a plan.
I love telling people that, like, actually, I think a month ago I let Emily know. I was like, canonically in the Marvel Universe, the original Human Torch killed Hitler, like burned him to death. The
first Marvel character burned Adolf Hitler to death in Earth 616. That has been that is Roy Thomas. You don't get more canon than that.
Yeah.
Nice.
Now, sometimes Hitler's brain got better, but Torch did it to him first.
Yeah.
And he'll do it to him again. Fuck you, Nazi.
I was going to say, Torch is still alive. If you told Torch he had to go kill the hate monger, he'd be like, oh, great, I had nothing else to do this afternoon.
Right. I guess I'll resign from Oracle Incorporated.
I guess I'll resign from this company that was founded with, like, the treasure found in the Black Pearl, because John Byrne is even weirder than you think he is.
Right. But like Mordor, like the Legion stuff is complicated. It's funny.
Oh,
Legion fans try and tell you that it's not, but it is. Like it really is, and it's hard to keep up with. Yeah. The only thing you have to know about Mordru is he's, like I said, he's a super powerful wizard, and the legend is he was never born. He will never die. He's like in charge of like the wizard's planet, and like he basically just owns the Legion again and again until they get whatever MacGuffin they need to beat him. He's also fought like the Justice League and the Justice Society in modern times because he's lived forever.
Okay.
The people who are like, oh man, I love Cable. What's the Venn diagram when people are like, I hope I hear about Mordru out of nowhere on this motherfucker? Like, it's got to be pretty small, but listen, email me if that's you, because we've
who would you say then is the Cable analog? Because I have a thought, but I want to see who you would say.
It's different for me, I guess, at different times. But oddly enough, like Deathstroke is probably the one for me who comes across like the most Cable-esque, which is weird because I think a lot of people connect Deadpool and Deathstroke. But like I see Deathstroke and Cable more analogous.
I agree 100%. I think that, there's a very good chance that Rob Liefeld was like, okay, I really want to do Deathstroke, but I want to do him twice. I want to do the cool Spider-Man mask. I'm going to make that a separate character. And then when he's not wearing the mask and he's got the old man look and one of his eyes is messed up, I'm going to make that a separate character. So I agree. Just
a dash of Terminator.
Just a little bit of Terminator. But the other thing that I always go back to is Hawkman, because I feel like,
I can see that.
Cable's got the most confusing Marvel origin I've ever come across. Like I said before, you ask 6 different people our age, you're going to get 6 different things. He was in Deadpool 2. His origin doesn't resemble any of the ones in the comics. Like, he's just one of those characters you can pick and choose. There's no power and responsibility speech another character has to give, and that's great. And to me, across the street, Hawkman's the same way. Like, there are a dozen Hawkman origins. They're all ridiculous, but they all end the same way, which is a guy with a mace beating up a fascist. Yeah. And I kind of feel like it's the same way, where it's like, if there was, if they walked into the bar with no name, Nathan Dayspring and Carter Hall was sitting there, they get to talking after a while. I just think, like, you know what? You guys were separated at birth, but you'd probably get along. You got a lot in common, down to the women you love who can only sometimes stand you.
Yeah, what's funny is, like, the biggest difference, honestly, is that Cable is probably much more liberal than Hawkman. So, like, but for real, like, Hawkman and Green Arrow have a very fun relationship. I feel like it would be very similar, except there would be more respect because they both feel like they're soldiers. What about you, Jesse? Who's Cable's DC analog?
Oh, man.
Jesse hates questions.
hates these questions. Hates them. Yeah.
Submit them 3 hours before this podcast next time. No, I mean, I wish I knew enough about the DC universe to give you guys a good idea. I'm trying to think of, like, the first thing I would look for is, like, okay, give me a time traveling superhero, because that's what I associate Cable with the most.
Yeah.
And then if there's some kind of, like, bionics or, metal alloy on this person's body, okay, now I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, that's right. Personality wise, I would have no clue because I don't know enough of them in there, but looks wise.
You just described Linear Men Rip Hunter.
Rip Hunter.
Ooh, okay, I like that.
Rip Hunter.
Specifically Linear Men Rip Hunter, because like he leads like Wave Riders on the team. I can't remember who else is, but he's got like cyborg parts at this point, and like they protect the time stream. And sometimes he shows up and gets in Superman's face and says he's full of shit. And sometimes he gets, shows up and gets in like, Darkseid's face and says he's full of shit. Just because his whole thing is like protecting the time stream. But like you said, somebody who time travels, who comes across as a grizzled vet with metal parts, Linear Men Rip Hunter.
Yeah,
I like that. I'm
looking at a picture right now.
I would bet that someone at DC was like, hey, this Cable's really popular. Don't we have a time traveler? Can you give him a metal arm? Can we work that into...
Does he have a cool name? Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, the only other thing I want to mention is we've touched on it a little bit, but these 2 issues are really the story of Kane, right? I mean, this is, Kane's your POV character. Cable's got this huge mythology that's being hinted at here. We know that it's going to be fleshed out. It continues to be fleshed out today. But Kane is this really interesting character. All the other characters refer to him as the kid, as the youngin, as the rookie, as again, you're supposed to think like, oh, he's got his whole future ahead of him. Maybe he won't be sucked into this, life of constant war. But of course he is, and he makes a ton of sacrifices. There's references of him going through the Weapon X project, which again, it's not really explored here, but anyone who's read the original Barry Windsor Smith knows that that's not a good thing. Wolverine's origin is he didn't want to be Weapon X. He was forced to be. So it's
even
the same.
if you read the Grant Morrison reimagining of it, except for Captain America, none of it's great.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Weapon
and
Plus.
you can argue that wasn't, it wound up as good as it could have just because Steve Rogers, but like otherwise, I don't know.
Yeah, no, and the whole point of that arc, Here Comes Tomorrow or Return to Weapon Plus, excuse me, is that no one wants to tell Steve Rogers that he was the first one because he doesn't want to think like, oh, people tried to duplicate me, and look at the horrors and crimes that they committed, including, committing Logan to this life of servitude to violence. So no, that's a really good point. But my point here is Kane kind of agrees to this terrible process because he wants revenge. Yeah. And that's a really dark path for the young, bright-eyed character to go down. And you see why. You see that Cable betrayed him and hurt the mentor figure and kind of betrayed the team, right? Like Kane's the one who's like, we should be called the Six Pack, like this beer that I found at this fancy party. Like,
well, he's an alcoholic and it's just
but Kane's the heart of the team, I guess is my point. Right. So when he gets taken out, when you see how dark he goes, you realize like, oh, this is what Cable is trying to avoid with Cannonball. This is what Cable is trying to avoid with his new team of soldiers who are all as young as Kane was.
Not only is he trying to avoid it, he thinks it's too late to avoid it.
Exactly.
He mentions it several times. It's like, fuck, I blew it with Sam,
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting because, again, I do like that there is a real arc here, and if it's not necessarily Cable's, it's definitely Kane's, because, he may end it in a place where it's like, oh, okay, we're going to be friends, but there's a lot of darkness, and if he could, he would have killed the main character. So I find that to be very interesting when the antagonist of the second part of a two-part story is not only very relatable, but he might be more morally in the right than the protagonist. So I thought that was a good turn.
One question, though, where he's like, oh, man, should I time travel in the future to save both of us? Or should I go back 3 seconds and kill Stryfe? I'm like, why don't you just go back and kill Stryfe? Then you won't be hurt, right? Like, you could do both. But then maybe it just doesn't work that way. And I get it. I'm not really trying to shit on it. But, that's the first thing I'll do. Just go back and kill him. Then you won't have these mortal injuries.
Cable, Doctor Who, he ain't when it comes to
maybe
the time travel.
Fixed point in time. I don't know.
I was just going to say, Stryfe is a fixed point in time. He's got to leave Amy Pond in Depression era New York for some reason. Right. He can't kill Stryfe. And whether because he thinks he's a clone or whatever else, it's like, nope, sorry, can't do it. Can't be avoided.
That's an episode 17 thing.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead. We will close up shop here and get into plugs. This has been our discussion of Cable, Blood and Metal 2-issue series. Dean Compton, why don't you tell me what's going on over there on the UnspokenDecade.com?
Well, man, Simbi fan just posted a new article. We just posted an article yesterday. So you're the UnspokenDecade.com, all of our older articles. And if you enjoyed hearing us ramble here about Cable for a while, I strongly suggest you go check out Darry's article about the Joe Casey Ladron era of Cable. It is it looks amazing. It comes across it's arguably the most fun you'll ever see Cable, both visually and story-wise. So, and he does a great job encapsulating it. So if you're like, boy, I'd like to read that, but that's like 20 issues. I've only got 20 minutes. Do I have the article for you? Over at Facebook, we're posting stuff every day. Sydney fan tends to run that. I've been pretty active on Twitter lately, so come over there and say hi. I've been responding to more things. And also, God, y'all, I bought $200 for the San Diego toys today, and I'm gonna do the same thing tomorrow. And I've been talking about it in the Twitter. So, I just got this Grimlock I'm showing him. It's great. This giant Marvel book. Hello, I'm talking about this stuff.
Oh.
Talking about this shit on my Twitter more, personally, not just 90s comic stuff. So, if you think I'm 3% fascinating, I would check it out. And obviously I'm 100.
That's what they soon learn after they visit that Twitter.
But they learned that they're probably going to hear about the guy from the carnage issues with the knife.
I'm changing my profile picture. All right. Oh, shit. Hey, on the Source Material Comics feed, I will tell you that this week, it was yesterday, it was me, myself, Benjamin J. Colon, and Alexis Hana. We discussed TMNT's The Last Ronin. That was 5 issues. A really good story, in my opinion. We had a great discussion about it. Prior to that, on Monday, it's sad, isn't it, Dean? On Monday, Fugitoid dropped. Did a small little solo podcast on Fugitoid #1. So if you want to learn who Fugitoid is, check that out. It was a lot of fun just to sit there and read over it, and you could get to hear me experience what was happening in that issue. And also, I talked about the action figures. I was like, hey, yeah, Fugitoid had a couple action figures, and guess who voiced the Fugitoid? And it's one of the. I think it might have been the 2012. Well, I'd have to.
I think it was the 2012 one. Yeah.
Was it? Yeah, it was. It was, by golly, Doctor Who himself, David Tennant, voiced the Fugitoid. Yeah. So the 27th. How about that? The 27th. You should be able to go back into the archive and listen to myself, Dean Compton, Darry Waite, talking about the Soviet super soldiers and Cyberforce and the Exiles. Oh yeah, now you're going to tune in. All right, so, but yeah, check that out. That's a happening, and I'm guesting all over the place. I should be on an episode of Small Screeners, which is hosted by our friend Chris Armstrong, who happens to be on the Unspoken Issues podcast quite a bit. That's happening this at some point. We're going to be talking creature features. We're going to be talking about Tremors 2. Also, should be in the archive, maybe in future podcasts. I don't know, but we do have an Unspoken Issues on tap for a Sleepwalker. It is Darkhawk coming together for a three issue story title. I think it's like Portals of Power. So check that out. But other than that, we are going to be closing up shop here. Thanks, of course, shout out to the W2M Network for hosting the podcast. For Dean Compton, for Darry Wade, I'm Jesse Starcher. We'll be talking to you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. Unspoken Issues is part of the UnspokenDecade.com, the home for 90s comics, blogs, and podcasts. Unspoken Issues also has a Facebook group you can join if you are interested. Just search the Unspoken Issues podcast and request to join. All of this would not be possible without W2Mnet.com and the Rattleitch Broadcasting Network, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.